This is the White House. On Sunday, July 2nd, 2023, while President Biden was hanging out at Camp David, a hazmat incident occurred. And it was so serious that White House personnel were evacuated from the building. The reason? An unknown white powdery substance. And the first thing to come to mind would be anthrax, which would be pretty scary. If you lived through the early 2000s, you'll remember that several people became infected and or died from anthrax poisoning after letters containing anthrax were sent to several media outlets and members of the US Senate. But thankfully, it was not anthrax that was in the White House. It was only cocaine.
The field test said cocaine.
Yeah.
Now these more conclusive lab tests, yeah.
I would like to know blow by blow who was responsible for this.
Too soon.
There is no too soon on this.
Too soon?
No one was injured, as far as we know. And it's an illicit drug at the White House. Why can't you actually have a bit of fun with it?
Yes, are people careless with their cocaine?
You know, it's an expensive drug.
So many questions there.
Yeah, drug users are known for being super careful. And as if the White House hadn't been sullied enough during the Biden administration, someone thought that it would be okay to bring an illegal drug into it. But who was it? Who could it have possibly been? Well, many pointed to the most obvious suspect, which would be Joe Biden's son, Hunter, who notoriously has had major problems with substance abuse and is reportedly in recovery. But more on that later. First, let's try and pin down where in the White House the cocaine was found. At first, the reporting was all over the place. It was found in a work area of the West Wing, or in a common area, or in the West Wing lobby, or in the West Wing library. But then, on July 5th, multiple officials involved in the White House cocaine inquiry told CBS News that the bag of powder was found in a cubby near the White House's West Executive entrance, not the formal West Wing lobby, as was previously reported. And that led to reporters trying to get someone from the White House to officially state on the record where exactly it was found.
Can you just clarify for us where exactly inside the West Wing the substance was discovered?
I'm not going to get into specifics. All I can say is when people visit the West Wing, there is the area of the West Wing where it is highly traveled, and that is what happens. People come through this particular area. It's highly traveled. I'm just not going to get into specifics. I'm not going to get into, not going to get ahead of the Secret Service, and so I'll let them speak to that.
Now, as you may know, the West Wing is the nerve center of the White House and includes the offices of the President, the Vice President, the Chief of Staff, the Press Office staff, the Situation Room, and the location of the Oval Office. And for once, Corinne is correct. That area sees a lot of foot traffic. The Washington Post reports that White House staffers are authorized to give guest tours of the West Wing, which often occur at night or on weekends. Guests are required to go through security screening before entering the White House complex, and then are asked to leave their phones in small boxes just before entering the West Wing. Officials said the substance was found near these boxes. So a couple things here. First, in my research of public White House visitor logs, during the same July weekend in 2022, there were hundreds of visitors who had West Wing tour appointments. In 2023, it could be more, it could be less. And with that said, since everyone needs to have an appointment and a background check, law enforcement knows the identity of every single person that enters the White House. So if in fact it was left by a visitor, it wouldn't be difficult to track that person down, right? Not so fast, because Politico put out a story claiming that the White House cocaine culprit is unlikely to be found. Lines may have been snorted and crossed, but it's possible we won't know by whom. Asked what the chances were of finding the culprit, a law enforcement official said that it's going to be very difficult for us to do that because of where it was. So let me get this straight. The White House is one of the most secure and heavily surveilled buildings in the world, but you're not going to be able to figure out who left it there. Even if there were surveillance cameras, unless you were waving it around, it may not have been caught by the cameras. It's a bit of a thoroughfare. People walk by there all the time. I don't know who that law enforcement official is, but they need to be fired. all you need to do is pin down the time frame the substance was left there, and then, oh, I don't know, investigate who was in the area. The fact that there was an effort to lower expectations from the very beginning reeked of cover-up and was not surprising in any way. Second, there were conflicting reports as to where it was found. CBS News said it was in one of the small boxes for visitors to place their cell phones, and the Washington Post said it was found near those boxes. So when reporters asked the White House to clarify and offer specifics, they refused to comment.
There are a couple of primary entrances into the West Wing. There's the one with which we're all familiar, right outside the driveway where the Marine stands when the president's in the West Wing, and there's another entrance off West Executive Avenue. Can you explain which entrance we're talking about?
I'm going to let the Secret Service speak to that.
Can you explain why you can't explain it? I mean, you described it as a heavily traveled area.
That's what I'm just saying what the Secret Service said. We got this from the Secret Service, so I'm sharing a little bit more with you.
So much for being the most transparent White House in American history. So Karine and the White House weren't prepared to let the American people know where the white powder was found. Fine, whatever. But what about the ramifications for the individual or individuals involved?
Yeah, thank you. If the Secret Service determines who brought the cocaine into the White House, does the White House support the prosecution of this individual?
I'm just not going to get into hypotheticals from here. Let the Secret Service do their job. It's under their purview. We are confident that they'll get to the bottom of it. I'm just not going to get ahead of this right this time.
So the wrong answer is exactly what Karine gave. The correct answer should be yes, because the White House is federal property and cocaine is illegal. According to the United States General Services Administration, all persons entering in or on federal property are prohibited from being under the influence, using, or possessing any narcotic drugs. And yes, cocaine is classified by the federal government as a narcotic. A person found guilty of violating any rule or regulation in this subpart while on any property under the charge and control of the GSA shall be fined under Title 18 of United States Code, imprisoned for not more than 30 days, or both. And of course, the fact that they won't commit to prosecute is not surprising, given that everyone living and working in the White House is a Democrat. Now, as I stated earlier, there was speculation that the dime bag was connected to Hunter Biden. But former President Donald Trump took it a step further, suggesting that it could also belong to Joe Biden. And Andrew Bates, the deputy press secretary, was asked if it was or not.
Former President Trump has made some pretty wild posts recently on social media. One of them was that the cocaine found in the White House had belonged to either the president or his son. Are you willing to say that that's not the case, that they don't belong to them?
I don't have a response to that because we have to be careful about the Hatch Act.
So a reporter asked if the White House would be willing to say if the cocaine wasn't Joe Biden's. The fact that the answer wasn't an immediate no is just mind-blowing. But again, not very surprising. Instead, Andrew Bates invoked the Hatch Act, a federal law passed in 1939 that limits certain political activities of federal employees. So for example, if a federal employee publicly showed support for a political candidate, like Biden's Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge, or now former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, that would be in violation of the Hatch Act. Of course, asking if drugs are theirs or not is in no way political and has nothing to do with the Hatch Act. But the White House will use any excuse they can to not answer a question.
Let me jump in. There has been all this media speculation. Does the cocaine belong to Hunter? Even though the family wasn't there, I know there's arguments about, well, when were they there? Is it unfair to go on TV and just toss this out?
I think that's very unfair because it's not substantiated by any facts or reason.
And both Howard Kurtz and Richard Fowler are wrong here. There is a fairness and logic to that speculation because the White House has not made any kind of effort to put that speculation to rest. Instead, they threw fuel on the fire by not answering simple questions.
There was a question yesterday during the press gaggle with Andrew Bates that was, I guess, he said that he was avoiding it because of the Hatch Act. I'm just asking again, can we just say once and for all whether or not the cocaine belonged to the Biden family?
So, A couple of things there. He mentioned the Hatch Act because the question was posed to him in using Donald Trump, and so he was trying to be very mindful. Okay, I hear you, but you're asking me a question, so I'm answering it for you. And so that's why he said the Hatch Act. So I would, have you read the transcript and read the transcript fully so you can see exactly what he was trying to say.
Karine is telling Caitlin Dornbos from the New York Post to read the transcript. So yes, Karine, let's do exactly that. Here, the reporter set the context for asking the question, but the question itself ultimately didn't have anything to do with Trump, but it did have to do with Joe Biden and his son. And instead of answering the question, Andrew Bates invoked the Hatch Act. So when asked if the White House could say once and for all whether or not the cocaine belonged to the Biden family, this should have been one of the easiest questions that Karine Jean-Pierre has answered in her entire life. But instead...
So we're not avoiding the question. That is not true. We've answered this question, litigated this question for the last 2 days, exhaustively.
Litigated. The White House briefing room is not a court of law. And in fact, Karine didn't even answer questions about the cocaine, let alone litigate them. She just referred everyone to the Secret Service.
Clearly, the Secret Service is in charge of security on campus, and so I would really refer you to them. So I would have to refer you to the Secret Service on all of this. I would have to refer you to Secret Service. They're the ones who handle this investigation, so it lives in their purview, in their world. Something that the Secret Service certainly is going to handle, and so that is a question for them. Again, when it comes to security, when it comes to anything of those types of protocols, that is something that Secret Service handles.
Did you see it? Did you see all the litigating? Anyway, Karine Jean-Pierre seemed less concerned with an illegal narcotic being brought into the White House and more concerned with how the press was covering it.
There has been some irresponsible reporting about the family, and so I got to call that out here. And I have been very clear. I was clear 2 days ago when talking about this over and over again as I was being asked a question.
Questions that you didn't even begin to answer, but please continue with your gaslighting, Karine.
As you know, and media outlets reported this, the Biden family was not here. They were not here. They were at Camp David.
But that's irrelevant. Just because the Bidens weren't at the White House when the cocaine was found doesn't mean that they weren't there when it entered the White House. And at that point, nobody even knows when it was placed. It could have been there for hours, days, weeks, who knows?
They were not here Friday. They were not here Saturday. They were not here Sunday.
But what Karine is saying is provably false. The Biden family was there on Friday. And we know this because that's the day Biden was in the Roosevelt room snapping at reporters.
What's happening now? What's going on? Read your press. I was right. Thanks.
Furthermore, White House poll reporters saw Jill Biden, baby Beau, Hunter Biden, and Joe Biden enter the presidential SUV and leave for Fort McNair a little after 6:30 p.m. And I should point out that Karine Jean-Pierre stated 2 days prior.
As you know, the president and the first lady and their family were not here this weekend, as you all reported on this, and as you also know that they left on Friday.
So I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt and say that Karine wasn't lying. She's just an idiot. But with that said, Karine Jean-Pierre is actually scolding the press for asking her to confirm that it wasn't Joe or Hunter Biden's.
So to ask that question is actually incredibly irresponsible, and I'll just leave it there.
In other words, how dare you ask questions that I in no way want to answer? And luckily for Karine, those questions were about to end, because the Secret Service would later announce that it's closed its investigation due to a lack of physical evidence. I know you're shocked. And the AP reported that the Secret Service found no fingerprints or DNA despite a sophisticated FBI crime lab analysis, and surveillance footage of the area didn't identify a suspect, and there are no leads on who brought the drugs into the building. So someone brought something into one of the most secure buildings on the planet and left it there. And the top law enforcement agencies in the country couldn't figure out who did it or even pin down a time frame as to when it was left there. Yeah, sure. So the case that even Scooby-Doo could solve will remain a mystery, and whether it's true or not, the majority of Americans will suspect a cover-up, and they have every right to believe it. Anyway, that's it for now. Follow me on Twitter at Don'tWalkRun. Be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel, and as always, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. If there is next time.